Kellan softly.
For the last decade, the yelling people on the television have been constantly bringing up how the NBA has a player empowerment problem and how it has become a players' league. But recent examples have shown how ridiculous this notion truly is and how the finger also needs to get pointed at the organizations. Blazers star Damian Lillard rightfully asked for a trade a year after his organization strangely blew it up, all while the now 32-year-old star was still inside the building. Portland allowed a closing sale shopping spree 2 trade deadlines ago, getting rid of capable winning players like CJ McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., Norman Powell, and Robert Covington. One deadline later, Josh Hart, who was the best part of the return for those 4 players, was also traded and then immediately emerged in New York as an excellent role player. Now, had Portland's roster reached its endpoint? Sure. But why was Dame left with nothing? Why didn't Portland trade him last year when it was clear it had no more chances of contending in this window? This follows Lillard watching an end of an era with LaMarcus Aldridge, Wes Matthews, and Nick Batum, and then a few years later after a trip to the Western Conference Finals, his reinforcements were shipped out along with his running mate in McCollum. So, Lillard recently saw the Blazers assemble more young talent for attempt number 4 at a core around him. A decent one, I'll admit, with Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, and Scoot Henderson. But now he's supposed to wait around for these kids to develop another 2 to 3 years after they re-signed Jeremy Grant and could use players like, I don't know, Larry Nance Jr., Norman Powell, and Josh Hart? Please. Lillard has earned the right to wave bye-bye to the Pacific Northwest just like he did to Paul George, and the Blazers fans will be the first people to tell you. Speaking of excellent basketball players toiling away, watching terrible front offices butcher roster after roster, Bradley Beal in D.C. goes for pennies to the Valley because of a no-trade clause. Oh, by the way, who exactly gave Bradley Beal that no-trade clause and then decided to resign him with a foundation less stable than a bounty castle, a.k.a. the expiring contracts of Kyle Kuzma and Kristaps Porzingis, instead of, trading him for more value when he had it, after Beal watched the post-Wall and post-Westbrook eras produce nothing? Now, have those 2 stars earned the right to dictate where they want to go, down to just one destination, like Dame with Miami and Bradley Beal with the Valley, eliminating the leverage of those front offices? That's more up for debate, and I understand that. But don't forget the organizations that put themselves in these positions.
Kellan softly is brought to you by absolutely nobody.
Did it for free, baby. Just did it for the love of the game. Thank you.
Well done.
I had to do breathing exercises beforehand. We were talking about this. I don't know how Big does it. It's an impressive skill.
Every day for 10 years, he comes up with a blast.
That is passion and nothing else, folks. Just pure passion.
When he's been gone, I think I've done 4 Vinny vents in the history of the show. I'm I can't do this every day. Well done, though.
Thank you.
Player empowerment. The latest on Damian Lillard is he has shot down 2 teams. And those 2 teams are Boston and the Clippers. Which you might be thinking, hey, Damian Lillard doesn't have a no-trade clause. How can he shoot these down? Well, Portland is going to try to do right by him at this situation. There's a defeated nature to their general manager, Joe Cronin, who inherited a lot of this mess in his job. So they're going to try to appease Damian Lillard, who wants to go one place and one place only. But I guess the peril of that is if Dame says no, your interest, if you're Boston or the Clippers, just dwindles because you don't want an unhappy player, certainly, or a player that's going to refuse to play for you. So why would you trade for him?
Vinny, we talked about this on the show yesterday. I think that arguably the biggest skill that a front office decision maker can have is seeing in the future, seeing how things are going to pan out 2 to 3 years from now. Because I understand with part of what I was talking about that I didn't bring up guys like James Harden and Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant who have certainly influenced it in a different kind of way. These are guys who were at their franchises they were drafted by for a decade. But I still see the notion that these types of guys are wrong for what they're doing, and I think that it's more on the responsibility of the front office to realize when it was best for them to move on and when that sort of time had ended. Now, ideally, what you're able to do is what the Golden State Warriors were at least attempting to do by having 2 eras kind of exist at once. And I think that's what the Blazers were trying to do. They were trying to build Damian Lillard a team around Jeremy Grant and other pieces that they were trying to get, but also having that next era ready. But as we've kind of seen with the Warriors, honestly, it just doesn't work.
No.
You cannot feasibly do it. Now, can you develop young talent while also winning? Yes, but to this extent, juggling 2 eras at once, that was something that we talked about with the Kevin Durant trade before it. Like, it almost felt like they were juggling the Chris Paul era and the Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson era together, and now they have almost emphatically committed to the now, to the present. And I think that's smart for teams to do, and I think it's smart for the Blazers to commit to this young core because it's pretty good. I think Scoot Henderson's going to be a star. I think Shaedon Sharpe has a chance to be an all-star, and I think Anthony Simons does too. Those are three really good young players, and they're going to get more here for Dame. But with that being said, they should have been able to see this coming a year or two ago. And
they should have been able to see it coming. But shouldn't have Damian Lillard been able to see this coming? He signed the contract extension.
I mean, there's an argument to be made there as well.
No, because why is he supposed to? So is he supposed to not believe the front office when they tell him they're going to be able to build a winner around him? That's what they kept telling him. They kept saying, yes, we are going to continue to build a winning team around you. We're going to attempt to contend, and look where it got them. Like, this was their attempt? Seriously?
I mean,
this is the best they could do for him?
We've been talking about Damian Lillard potentially leaving Portland for, 2.5 years? I think maybe the front office or a lot of the decision makers in Portland got to the point and said, well, if he hasn't asked out now, he's not going to ask out anytime.
Sure.
Like, he's here forever.
And this is not a 100-0 argument, to be clear. I'm just saying that people should treat this more as a 50-50 discussion because I feel like 95% of the time when this discussion is had, the attention goes to automatically pointing the finger at the player. And I feel like it should go to the front office a lot more than it does to the player. Something Chris Paul talked about when he was on podcast and making the rounds a couple weeks ago with his book tour was how Daryl Morey called him up and asked him about going to OKC. And Daryl Morey told Chris Paul, he's like, do you want to go to OKC? And Chris Paul was like, honestly, at this stage of my career, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, so I would prefer to go elsewhere. And Daryl Morey's like, great, after everything you did for us and you wanting to come here, we're going to do right by you, and we won't send you there. Where did they send him? They sent him to OKC. What did we believe that the Phoenix Suns were going to ultimately do with Chris Paul? They were going to find him and send him somewhere where it made the most sense for him, a contending situation. They weren't going to do him dirty, quote-unquote, by any means. Now, did they do him dirty sending him to Washington? No, but they put Washington in a huge pickle, and Chris Paul, by fact, in that same pickle, finding him this new team. So he goes to Golden State, which is by no means a perfect fit for him. It's an interesting one, but it's one that more applies to Golden State from a salary perspective than a basketball perspective. So again, I just feel like the focus goes too much on the players specifically when it should go towards the front offices a lot more.
To play devil's advocate, though, with the Kevin Durant to Phoenix situation and this Damian Lillard Miami thing, we can't get to the point where contracts mean nothing, where you sign a deal where you have multiple years left and you hold your franchise hostage because you only will go to one team, and you're ruining their franchise. Like, we're saying that Portland's going to do right by Damian Lillard by trying to get a deal to Miami. Mm-hmm. It could cripple Portland because they're going to get by far not the most return.
Correct. That's why I ended it's called the blast, so do I call this the softly? What do I call it exactly? I ended the softly by saying that it's more up for debate in terms of this, and I agree, and I think that's where, like, I could say, like, this should be a part of the new collective bargaining agreement. Like, how do you even, like, come up with a rule for that where players can't dictate where they want to go? Remember Goran Dragic, with 48 hours to go until the trade deadline, 24 hours, his agent leaks a list of just 3 teams, and then somehow McDonough still gets that first-round pick out of it somehow when it was down and the market had really slimmed up on him. That is the part, I think, where I do believe players should have a say in where they want to go specifically, but I believe that I back them 100% in their desire to leave. But dictating where they want to go as well, that's where, to your point, you look at Dame, it's like, we were talking about this yesterday, like, do you believe that if he doesn't get traded, he's really going to just pout and not play? Or if he gets traded somewhere else, he's going to pout and not play? Like, he doesn't seem like that type of guy. And that's where this is, like, how much of it is agent games, how much of this is negotiation, leverage, all that kind of stuff. And that's where it kind of gets a bit ridiculous and hard for us to exactly pinpoint things.
The difference with his situation is there's so much time left on the contract, and the number is enormous. I mean, I think it approaches or maybe crosses over $60 million annually by the end of that contract. So, the Kawhi Leonard situation was San Antonio trades him to Toronto. He knew he didn't want to be there, ultimately, as he proved, but won a championship, made the most of it. But it was a one-year stayover. Dame is not going to agree to go somewhere where he doesn't ultimately want to be, with the possibility of having to be stuck there for 3-4 years. I see Jarrett's point, and I see your point as well, so I'm somewhat in the middle. Lillard signed the contract. And when he signed that huge contract extension, it wasn't like the Portland Trailblazers were doing everything correctly from a front office standpoint either. It's, in a lot of, and I love Damian Lillard. He's my favorite non-Phoenix Suns player in the league.
Yeah.
But this, in a lot of ways, to me, this smacks of, you want your cake and you want to eat it too.
That's a perfect way to put it. Yeah, I think there's got to be a balance and a middle ground somewhere, and that's that was the whole point of the discussion.
Yes.
I was glad to spark the discourse.
I hate that phrase that I just used because I've never ever been in possession of cake and not wanted to eat it. Like, I'm just collecting cake.
1 hour and 43 minutes away in about 14 seconds, Vinny. You're almost there to your point where you can indeed have your cake and eat it too.
Yes.